On today's show, we interview the New York City-based venture capitalist by the name of Patrick McGinnis. Patrick McGinnis is the inventor of the phrase FOMO, which stands for fear of missing out. And on today's show, he joins us to teach the art of practical decision-making in a world of overwhelming choice. He also shares about his new book, Fear of Missing Out Sapiens, Practical Decision in a World of Overwhelming Choice, that talks about how FOMO will impact major world events. And by the way, he wrote this book well before the coronavirus scare was a thing. Patrick also talks about how in our world of perpetual digital distraction, how FOMO can impact your mental health, your productivity, and your financial well-being. All this and more coming up next.
Some shows don't need a celebrity narrator to introduce the show, but this show does. 2 men, 8 kids, co-created by 2 different women, 13 multi-million-dollar businesses. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Thrive Time Show.
Now, 3, 2, 1, here we go!
Started from the bottom, now we here. Started from the bottom, and we'll show you how to get here. Started from the bottom, now we here. Started from the bottom, now we here. Started from the bottom, now we here.
Yes, and yes, Thrive Nation, it is a very special occasion. Many of you are quarantined from coast to coast, and yet we continue on because that's what Americans do. And on today's show, we're talking about the art of practical decision-making in the world of overwhelming choice. Patrick McGinnis, welcome onto the Thrive Time Show. How are you, sir?
I am good. I'm holed up in my apartment in New York.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful. What have been the highlights of being holed up in your apartment in New York?
Oh my goodness. I would say many FaceTime conversations with friends, learning how to cook something new.
Oh, wow.
That's about it.
Well, you've had a ton of success. A lot of people know you as the guy who created the phrase FOMO. A lot of people know you from your TED Talk or the content you produce out there. But share with the listeners, where did you start off? Where did you come from? Like, what was life like growing up for you?
Yeah, so I'm from a small town in Maine. It's called Sanford, Maine, a town of about 20,000 people. Very middle class kind of community where you don't realize it at the time as a kid that it basically everybody's about the same, and you think that there's more division. But now, having grown up, I realize we're kind of all the same. Went to public schools there. You did all the things you do in Maine, like ski and walk in the woods and stuff like that. And I was just a kid who was very interested in school and in academics and in stuff like that. So pretty simple stuff, actually.
Now, what did you when you were playing around in the woods? Did you do forts and that kind of thing? Did you do tree houses?
Yeah, I love that you asked that question. We actually had a whole sort of system of tree houses behind our houses, and we used to have these sort of like wars against the people in the neighborhood. It was incredible, actually. And one time, somebody booby trapped my tree house and they made basically a hole in the forest floor, and then put like a carpet over it, and I fell in it.
Oh, really? Did you get hurt, or were you okay?
No, it was just a little hole, but it was rough. It was definitely not. You had to watch out where you stepped.
Now, final a tough business question for you here, just tough one here. Did you like Cobra Commander, or did you like were you a big Cobra Commander guy? Did you like Destro? Did you like Lady Jane? Who was your favorite G.I. Joe, or did you have one?
No, I was more Master of the Universe. So I was.
Whoa.
My brother had all the He-Men, and I had all the Skeletors.
Oh, man, I tell you what, you get a mega point. You get a mega point. That was the right way to answer that question. Now, when did you figure out that what you wanted to do professionally, that it was time to move on from the forts and the Skeletor and to move into, when did you figure out what you wanted to do?
So I was completely clueless. And in fact, I went to college. I went to Georgetown. And as a senior in college, all of the kids that I respected were basically trying to get jobs in investment banking. And then I looked up how much investment bankers made, and I realized that they basically made more than like my father. And so I thought to myself, well, I want to be an investment banker. And so I went and got a job as an investment banker. And I realized when I got there how much I hated it. And luckily for me, I had spent a year abroad in Latin America when I was a junior in college, and I learned Spanish. And so I ended up moving into the Latin America banking group, and that made it tolerable. But again, I thought, I really don't like finance here. And then I told my boss I was going to leave, and he said, why don't you interview for a job in the venture capital group? So I did that. I got this job in venture capital group, and I started working there, and all of a sudden I loved what I did. And so it was really only when I was about 23, 24 and started working in VC that I thought, wow, this is what I meant to do.
How old are you now?
I am 44.
So when you were going to Georgetown, Allen Iverson was the man, right?
He's my year, yeah. He was the man until he left us for the
but talk about how awesome it was watching that little guy fearlessly just take the soul to the hole. Talk about watching Allen Iverson at his peak.
Yeah, it was incredible because, listen, the thing about Georgetown basketball is that the players, they're on campus. It's not like they're sort of living in some ivory tower. They're at the dining hall. Allen he sort of laid low, but the team was amazing, and I went to every one of the games, and I think it really brought the school together. It created this culture that we all enjoyed so much, basketball, and he was just incredible at the time. Obviously, he just just blew your mind every time he played. Obviously, he's had a hard time going forward from there, but it was really a big part of my college experience.
Why don't you call Allen Iverson today and give him some tips?
I would be happy if you'd be willing to listen to me. I watched that documentary about him that everybody saw, and I do think that he might need a little advice. It could be helpful to him.
Okay, I'm making a note here. I'm going to book Allen Iverson on this podcast. I'm putting on my to-do list here today. I'm serious. I'm going to do it. I'm going to reach out to him, and hopefully he doesn't reject me. But now moving on from Allen Iverson, you've written this new book, and the new book is called Fear of Missing Out Sapiens. Practical decision-making in a world of overwhelming choice. So I'll try not to make it too topical, but here's an example. You have your smartphone out today, and according to Nielsen, the average person spends 11.3 hours per day on that thing. Constantly. Push notifications coming in, emails coming in, phone calls coming in. So right now, as I'm doing this show with you, I'm missing out on phone calls. I'm missing out on text messages. And I don't have my push notifications ever on, so I'm missing out on connection or what. Talk to us about this overwhelming choices we now have. Talk to the listeners out there about the overwhelming choices that they now face.
Yeah, so we have always existed in a world where there was some element of FOMO in our DNA. In fact, if you go back to the earliest humans, they were well aware of what they needed but didn't have in order to survive, right? Because it was a rough world, and they needed to make sure that, hey, if there's a source of food or shelter, that they could get their hands on it in order to live. However, now we live in this time where, whether it's, as you said, a great example is all of the notifications and information and emails, just all of those little data points every day. You get hundreds and hundreds of little sort of pings, little knocks on the door with information for you. Or it's even, if you think about just like, what are you going to watch on Netflix, right? So you go on Netflix, there's over 7,000 titles. If you want to buy something on Amazon has many, many, many more times what any sort of store you could ever shop at has in terms of items. And so we are drowning in choice, and we are not designed to be able to handle that. There's no way to do it. And so as a result, it creates a lot of anxiety for us. And that's where FOMO comes from. It's the anxiety that happens when we think that there's something better out there for us. And at the same time, it's the anxiety that there could be something going on that everybody else is doing that we're not doing at that moment. And so that combination is what gives us FOMO.
And what made you, what inspired you to write this new book, Fear of Missing Out Sapiens? What inspired you to write it?
Well, what happened was I invented the word FOMO. So as I told you, I grew up in the small town of Maine, and then I went and started studying in 2002 at Harvard Business School. And this was right after 9/11. It was right after the tech boom imploded in the 2001 period. And so I had been through some pretty serious changes in my life, because I was working in VC and then tech blew up, and then I was living in New York and 9/11 happened. And it just felt like the world as I knew it was not, couldn't be relied upon, and that you never know what was going to happen to you. And I felt a sense of insecurity around that. And so when I got to business school, it was like this kind of 2-year period in a bubble, and I decided this is awesome, and I'm going to just enjoy and take advantage of everything I can. And so I basically tried to do everything. I went to every party, every class, every lecture, every trip. I was constantly running around, and I realized that was not normal. I'd never lived like that before. I had never been so crazed. And so I started calling that desire to be part of everything, I started calling it the fear of missing out. And I shortened that to FOMO and started using that all the time in conversations. My friends started using it. And then when I was about to graduate in 2004, I wrote an article for our school newspaper all about FOMO. And it was the first time it was ever used anywhere. And then, 10 years later, it's in the dictionary. And so I just, over the years, as I studied FOMO and seen it in the business world and personal lives, and I realized that somebody needs to sit down and talk about it and give us not only the reasons why it happens and the implications of it, but also how we can overcome it.
You invented the word FOMO, and I have invented the word jackassery, and I'm going to give that word to you from the root word jackass, and it's a wealth repulsion strategy that people sometimes cling to. It's like a universal thing. Now, FOMO, folks. In this new book, Fear of Missing Out Sapiens, you talked about this, but even before the coronavirus stuff happened, you talked about how people are paralyzed by fear. And you wrote this book well before this coronavirus thing. You wrote this.
I know.
So talk to me about this. Because I 100% share your worldview on this. People are paralyzed by fear. And you wrote this before the coronavirus crisis. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, Corona has been, it's been a wake-up call for all of us. And frankly, I've spent a lot of time thinking about FOMO in the past couple weeks. Why did I start thinking about FOMO? Because I wanted to buy toilet paper. And I tried, and there was none at the store because everybody had panic bought it, or Purell. And then I started to realize that nobody wanted to stay home. They wanted to be out and about when we were told not to, especially in New York City. I've been under lockdown for 2 weeks, right? And I see out my window people running around in groups. And then I saw myself this desire to check the news all the time, even though it's all bad news and it just makes you feel terrible and there's nothing you can do about it. And so it was a really interesting initial reaction to the whole thing. Was I felt FOMO in so many different ways. And then, of course, after a couple of days, I realized, this is interesting. I'm actually feeling sort of like the opposite of FOMO because there's nothing to do. And so I've been forced to figure out how to spend my time. I've gone back to books I should have read 5 years ago. I've been connecting with people I haven't talked to in 10 years. And so for this brief period of time, actually, we're getting this opportunity to sort of think about what do you actually want to do instead of worrying about what others are doing. That being said, I have a feeling when things get back to normal, we're all going to be so happy that we actually have things to miss out on again, that we're going to try to do everything, and we're going to see a bunch of FOMO as everybody tries to sort of make the most of time.
Well, I have some good news for you. You've probably seen it, but
Dr. Deborah Birx, the American physician and diplomat who is helping to lead the fight against the coronavirus pandemic, has recently reported from the White House podium that the initial report that showed that 2.2 million Americans were at risk of dying from this coronavirus has now said that they've made some adjustments.
I'm sure many of you saw the recent report out of the UK about them adjusting completely their needs. This is really quite important. If you remember, that was the report that said there would be 500,000 deaths in the UK and 2.2 million deaths in the United States. They've adjusted that number in the UK to 20,000. So 500,000 to 20,000. We're looking into this in great detail to understand that adjustment.
So it might we might not all die. You know what I mean? We might have as many deaths as like this. I think in 2017 and 18, I have the stats here. It showed that in America, 80,000 people died from the common flu, and so they're showing that the new projections. You might have much less numbers. We were talking about end times predictions, and now it looks like that number's coming down. But I'm glad that you are finding creative ways to better yourself during this time. Now, you've written about FOMO and FOBO. I don't know if we have time to talk about FOMO, and hobos, but can we talk about FOBO? What is FOBO?
Yeah, so FOMO stands for fear of a better option.
Oh.
And that's what happens when we are waiting for something better to come along. And as a result, we're not willing to choose anything. So while FOMO, we're trying to do everything all the time, FOBO is like, I don't want to decide. And I wrote a piece about this in Politico recently because of the Democratic primary, where like people were so afraid to commit to one candidate because what if somebody better came along? And you see this with all kinds of decisions, with careers, with what you're going to watch on Netflix. You just keep searching and searching and searching. You never commit to anything. And it's a type of decision paralysis that it's not just bad for you, it's bad for everybody around you, because it really stinks to have to wait for somebody who won't make up their mind.
In your book, Fear of Missing Out Sapiens, you talk about how FOMO impacts mental health, productivity, financial well-being. And I know, and the listeners who listen to this show know this because I talk about it all the time, but Psychology Today has come out with an article that said, is your smartphone making you dumb? That reports the average person is being interrupted on average over 100 times a day. Recently, there's been other articles that have come out and research from Nielsen that has research that's shown that the average person is on their phone 11.3 hours a day being distracted. So they start reading this ebook, and then they take that phone call, and then they switch to that email, and then they start listening to 2 seconds of this podcast, and then they go back to opening your new book, and then they go, and it's just like this chronic distraction. Can you talk about how FOMO impacts mental health?
Completely correct. And the thing about FOMO is, there's two parts of it. There's the fear, and then there's the missing out. In order to overcome FOMO, you have to overcome your fear, but you also have to learn how to miss out. And so when you don't do that, you basically, number one, you overwhelm yourself with information. Number two, your productivity goes, just through the floor, right? And then number three is when we spend our time online looking at other people's lives, and those lives are idealized, for example, you look at somebody's life on Facebook or Instagram, we all know that that's not reality. That picture represents a snapshot in time and oftentimes has filters and it's edited and all this sort of stuff. But when we compare ourselves to others people, especially unrealistic images, we get a real hit to our self-esteem. And so those are the kind of implications you see this. And some of you may say, like, oh, that's not me. I can guarantee even if it's not you, your kids are feeling this. It's because there's this pressure to live up to other people that comes with FOMO. And in fact, it's not just productivity and mental health, but it gets into spending. People, there's a great survey by Schwab that found that something like 40% of Americans spend more money than they should because of FOMO.
Can we? I'm gonna have to probably edit out this. I'm gonna have to this part of the show, Patrick. I'm gonna have to go back and I do a lot of editing where I might have to add in some creative sound effects. But I have this theory called "Don't give a f***o."
Yeah.
And what for me is like I have 5 kids, and people always they come to Tulsa, they come to the conference, they buy my book, they listen to the podcast, and they go, "Can I come shadow you?" And they come to my house, and they are usually overwhelmed by the size of the pool and the waterfall, but underwhelmed by the house. And they're always like, "I guess I thought you had a bigger house." Or, "Clay, how many miles do you have on your Hummer?" And I'm like, 220. And they're like, "God," and it's suburban, looks like it's old as anything. What? And I'm like, I don't care. I don't need them to get a nice car to impress you. And then they're like, you're wearing and-a-one shorts. How much did people literally ask me, how much do your shorts cost? And I'm like, $10, $10. And they go, you're wearing $10 shorts and you're successful? And then they go, yeah, but you're wearing Yeezys. And I'm like, yeah, it's only because people who listen to this show mail me Yeezys sometimes. But it's just, I wear the same thing every day. I've been married for 20 years. I got 5 great kids. For me, I turn all the apps off. I don't look at the apps. I don't care what's culturally relevant right now. I get up every morning and I make my list. I make my goals for my faith, my family, my finances, my fitness, my friendship, my fun. And then I just go do it. And I think that you could encourage somebody out there, because I don't go on Instagram and go, oh my gosh, Patrick's got more followers than me. He's awesome. Because I know my shows will maybe be a little more funny than the average show. People always comment on the humor, but it's maybe not as deep as Tim Ferriss. So I'm not going to try to be deeper than Tim Ferriss and funnier than Jim Gaffigan and more clever than Patrick McGinnis. You know what I mean? We all have our own niches. But can you speak to that for somebody out there who's just trying to they're comparing themselves constantly? What advice would you have for somebody who's just
stuck in that doom loop of FOMO and comparison?
Yeah, when the comparison to other people is so bad. It's bad from a mental health perspective. If you look at the psychology of it, when you spend all your time comparing yourself to other people, you're basically in your head inventing a bunch of scenarios that may not even correspond to reality. And it's informed by information asymmetry. So if you had perfect information and you saw somebody on their vacation with their perfect family, but then you knew actually they're all fighting, and by the way, mom and dad are talking to lawyers about a divorce, you wouldn't feel any FOMO. But you have filled it in. You filled in the blanks. And that's where you create the negative feedback loop that can actually cause problems. And so what I always tell people is, if you want to deal with FOMO, there's 2 things you got to do. Number one is you have to try to remove the information asymmetry. So try to figure out, am I inventing this whole thing, or is it real? Is it something that, I do actually want to partake in? And maybe you could do that. But number 2 is ask yourself a simple question. is this something you actually want to do, or you're doing it because you're basically trying to keep up with somebody else? Because, you think back to what our moms always told us as kids. If so-and-so jumped off a bridge, would you jump off too? It's the same thing. If you spend your life trying to live somebody else's dream and not your own, it's a massive waste of time and energy.
I have a really, can we talk coronavirus just for a second? Can we do that?
Yeah.
I have people in my life who are super high up elected officials that I talk to somewhat often. And it's amazing how much of the policies that each city's making are based upon the other city's policies, and then no one's actually looked into the policies. It's really weird. So like right now, Neil Ferguson, the United Kingdom scientist who predicted the doomsday deaths of 500,000 Brits and 2 million Americans, he came out in the Wall Street Journal just yesterday, and
I saw that.
Yeah, and he said that his model was wrong, and essentially about 20,000 people are predicted to die in the UK versus 500,000. So almost immediately, America, our leading experts, pointed out there are flaws in our model, and now you're seeing Governor Cuomo got up there and said that perhaps if he could go do it again, the strategy. Let me play the audio. Let me play the audio real quick here.
A modified public health strategy that dovetails and complements a get back to work strategy, right? What we did was we closed everything down. That was our public health strategy. Just close everything. All businesses, all workers, young people, old people, short people, tall people, every school, close everything. If you rethought that or had time to analyze that public health strategy, I don't know that you would say quarantine everyone. I don't even know that that was the best public health policy. Young people then quarantined with older people was probably not the best public health strategy, because the younger people could have been exposing the older people to an infection. So how do you modify the public health strategy to make it smarter from a public health point of view, but also starts to get you back to work? Younger people can go back to work. People who have resolved can go back to work. People who, once we get this antibody test, show that they had the virus and they resolved, can go back to work. That's how I think you do it. It's not we're going to either do public health or we're going to...
But, you're hearing him share, and again, all of us could be great Monday morning quarterbacks, but he's just sharing, hey, perhaps that wasn't the best strategy. But I know people who are in elected office right now who have told me that the reason why they made their decisions is because this other leading official did, but no one actually read the data that was out there. Does it not boggle your mind you're writing about it in this book, but does it not boggle your mind how much people base decisions based upon other people's decisions?
Oh, I think it's it's incredible. I think if you look at this corona situation, there's two interesting things to look at. And I'm not a virologist or a data scientist, so I'm not going to get into the numbers. But what I'll say is, number one, there clearly is FOMO. When one person does something, other people feel they should do it, and maybe there's no data to support that, and in different ways, yeah. But then there's a second thing, which is FOMO. And I will say, Andrew Cuomo, you may disagree with his policy, but he was decisive. He was
decisive. Yep.
And that's, I think that is a much better situation than somebody who keeps waiting and waiting for more info, and then eventually, by the time they get to making a decision, they don't have any options left anyway because they waited too long. And I think if you look at Brexit, for example, they kept delaying the votes, and they could never come to agreement in the parliament, and that's why basically it took years to make a deal. That's massive FOMO. So you don't want to end up there either. FOMO. So I think it is important for leaders to be taking new data into account, making decisions, but being decisive early and then correcting on that is better than making no decision at all.
Now, this book, there's so much good stuff in the book, but I thought what I would do today to kind of spice it up a little bit is I have a business consultant here from Tulsa, Oklahoma with me in the studio here. His name is Robert Redmond. Robert, meet Patrick.
Patrick, it's an honor to meet you, and I want to let you know something. Fun fact. I got married about a year and a half ago, and I am planning on naming my firstborn son Patrick.
Wow.
Yeah.
I love that's a good name.
It's a strong name. A strong Irish name.
I have a question for you, Robert. Do you have any FOMO now that you're married?
Like,
I'm serious. I know guys that don't get married because they say, if I commit, maybe there's a better option out there.
oh,
How have
you know,
I'm just
that's a
curious.
great question.
I'm just curious. People ask me
Yeah,
that.
I mean, when I dated other girls, I had that, but when I met my wife, I didn't really have any fear and anxiety about things.
What about FOMO?
Yeah.
I know. Okay. So what?
No.
questions would you have for-
Again, even FOMO.
Okay.
It's like I met the right person.
Okay.
And I was like, she's it. I want to spend the rest of my life with her, even if we may change over the years. I want to change with this
All right.
person. So
That's fair enough. I tried to paint you into a corner, tried to make you make regrettable statements.
I'm just nervous. My wife is going to listen to this.
No, I
and
know
now I'm
she
going to have
will.
a conversation at home.
She
so.
will. I was trying to paint. Patrick, I never paint my guests into a corner, but I paint my guest hosts into a corner. So
I love
okay.
it. I
All right.
love
So
it.
Robert, feel free to ask Patrick any question you have here about FOMO, his newest book here.
So interested in the new book, but I do want to ask a question because I work with business owners all across the country, work with a lot of contractors especially. Really, our firm specializes in working with GCs and roofing companies, plumbing companies, electricians, the essential businesses that we're all talking about right now. And a lot of these guys get into these really negative cash flow situations because they'll have people who constantly want them to do more work. They'll extend out their cash flow with like a net 30, net 60-day pay cycle, and it really ends up hurting them. And then when I say, why are you doing this? Why not? It would be better for you to say no to these additional jobs, not take on the additional staff. You'd be more profitable. You'd make more money if you focused on, for example, service work or jobs where you can get a quicker pay cycle. And so the question is, how have you seen FOMO hurt businesses the most? Or what are some examples in working with businesses where you've seen FOMO really hurt them practically?
I love that question. Thank you so much, Robert. And I'll give you my two favorite ones. One that's a little funnier and one that's a little more serious. The first one is our friends at Pepsi. You guys remember Crystal Pepsi?
Oh yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That's FOMO. I mean, hey, we want to have a Sprite, so let's create a clear version of Pepsi and market it. When businesses create products basically because somebody else is doing it, and at the end of the day, it's not really in their wheelhouse, customers know, right? Customers, they're smart. They're looking for things that are, genuine. And so I think that you see that a lot of times. It's like the Me Too product is just, it's very rare that the Me Too product is better than the original. So that'd be one. Second, I would say is I was just talking to a friend of mine who was the CEO of a company called Fab.com, and they raised $330 million and then went bankrupt. Why? Because they expanded too quickly. They were on a land grab. They spread themselves too thin because they thought they had to be everywhere to all people. And it's very hard to succeed that way. And so, again, I think it's about we talked a little bit about information asymmetry. You got to sit down. You got to make the numbers work. Right. You have to, as an entrepreneur, entrepreneurs are great because they are dreamers and they look at the positive side of things. And that's why entrepreneurs do the things they do. But you've got to also have people around you, whether it's a business partner or that other voice in your head that keeps things from getting out of control.
Did you say that Fab.com raised $300 million and went bankrupt?
Yeah. 330, and this was during a regular time. It wasn't during a downturn. It was just, it's a crazy story.
What did Fab.com do or not do? Like, what was their core service or product?
They sold housewares, so you could buy, tchotchkes for your apartment and stuff like that.
Whoa! I tell you what, folks, I'm gonna hit this button. Wow! Wow!
Answer.
Now you're a venture capitalist, am I correct?
Yes.
A lot of people don't know what that means. That it's like, oh, he's a venture capitalist. My good friend Patrick over here. You guys want a cigar? Or my good friend, but people don't know what it means. Can you explain on maybe a third grade level what does it mean to be a venture capitalist, my friend? What does it mean to be a venture capitalist? What does it mean?
Okay, so basically, when somebody's starting a business, an entrepreneur has an idea for a new business, they need financing many times. And so when they're looking for money, some businesses can go to the bank, like proven businesses like a restaurant. Banks understand restaurants and they will lend to restaurants. But for things that are more innovative, where there's a lot more risk involved, you can't just go to the bank. And so these opportunities are where venture capitalists will invest. They will put money in exchange for ownership in a company, and in doing so, they help fund the growth of the company. And at the same time, they try to add value by getting involved, helping the companies to make connections, make hires, meet potential clients, and then over time, then they'll continue investing with the idea that eventually they're going to sell their shares either on the public markets or to another investor.
And do you have any big winners in your career where you say, you know what, man, I nailed it with that one. Ooh, that was good. That you can share, or you're not allowed to share these things?
I can tell you about two that one that's kind of an older one and one's a newer one. One's one I made it right at the beginning of my career. It was kind of in the eBay of Latin America. It's a company called Mercado Libre. It's now on the NASDAQ 100. And the great story about them is they actually raised $20 million right before the 2001 sort of tech crash, and they were the only people who had any money, and so they cut all their costs. They got super lean. They just plugged away at it, and now, at the time it was probably worth about $30 million, $40 million. Now the company, at least before the crash, was worth about $7 billion.
Now, how do you get paid? How do you make money as a venture capitalist? How do you finally get your payoff?
That time around, I was so junior, I didn't get anything, but my boss had shares in the company. So that's what happens. You have an ownership stake in the company and you get paid that way, basically. My other sort of happy story is a company called Ipsy that was started by a good friend of mine. And it is a company that basically uses YouTube celebrities to sell cosmetics. And that company I invested in when it was, didn't do any revenues. It was pre-revenue. And today the company is doing about $500 million in revenue, and it's been really successful. And I think it'll do even well in this time of challenge because it's not an expensive product, and people, the last thing they cut are the little things like beauty that keep them happy.
Now, Robert and I, we want to respect your time, and so we have rapid fire. We've got 3 final questions for you. I'm gonna let Robert go first, and then I'm gonna hit you with the heavy stuff. Okay. So, Robert, you do what you do, and then I'm gonna one up you.
So to my understanding, typically the reason why banks don't work with companies that a VC might work with is because there's a lot more risk possibly for that bank. And so my question is, how do you determine whether or not a company that's coming to you guys for funding will be successful?
Ooh, the hard stuff.
Good question. Love it. Okay. It's very hard to know, of course, with great certainty. That's why you get such a great return, because you're taking more risk. But there are 3 things that I focus on. Number one is I make sure that I truly understand the industry. I don't invest in things I don't understand. And so if I understand the industry, then I have the context to know, okay, this is a great idea, and they actually have a novel approach that could do really well. The second is the people. You need to. For example, I like to invest in people who have failed a couple times before, because when they've done that, they've made those mistakes that everybody makes the first time around, and they've learned. And then looking at a team that has some depth to it, I think you want to have not just one star performer, but a couple of star performers, because you want one person who's going to disagree with the other one, so that productive tension can get you the best ideas. Those 2 together is really important, and then just bringing in great people around the company. So bringing in other investors who can add value, and executives who may be retired who can come on the board. You take all those things together, and it's not that it's going to be successful, but you've given the company an unfair advantage.
Right. That's really good. Yeah.
Now, I told Robert I was going to one up him, but I'm probably going to one under him here. But you remember back in middle school, the middle school dances. How many kids went to your school there, Patrick, in your middle school?
Oh, it was actually, it's Maine, so I don't know, a couple hundred maybe.
And remember that first school dance, the middle school, where they turned on it was the old school disco ball. It's in this. Was it in the school gym or the cafeteria? Where was your school dance?
Yeah, our prom was in the cafeteria.
Oh yeah. Yep. What year was that?
Prom was 1998.
Now think about your favorite old school jam from that year. If you can just kind of think of one of your favorite old school slow songs, the one where the DJ played it and everybody came out there on the dance floor. Do you have a certain old school jam that was your jam back in the day?
I mean, I always liked Stairway to Heaven. It was the last song of the night.
Stairway to Heaven, really? That
was always the last song at every school dance. I don't know if that's pervasive around America, but I'll tell you, in Maine, that's like part of the culture.
That's a controversial take. Controversial. Now, do you have a favorite rap song, old school rap song? Do you have a favorite old school rap song?
Yeah, of course.
What do you got?
Ice Ice Baby.
Oh, sick. That is sick. Okay. I get it now. I know what kind of investor you are. I know what kind of author you are. I know a lot about you now.
What's your take on time blocking? And how important is time blocking for your career at this point?
And I basically have every day my time blocked off with certain tasks. So I know going in, I plan the night before how I'm going to spend those first 3 hours. So if I need to do emails, I'll do an hour of email and then I'll do an hour of something else. But I really like to get that morning going, and I don't like to spend a lot of time chit-chatting on the phone and stuff like that. I'll do that at lunch.
But you block out your time. Oh, yeah. Everybody we interview who's super successful blocks out their time. It's an amazing idea. It's a controversial idea. It requires dealing with FOMO. Because when you're blocking out, you're like, right now we're doing this show together, and I know I'm going to look at my phone real quick. I always put my phone down. I turn it off. But let me just look, see how many missed calls I've had since we've been on this. Let me just check. Oh, here we go. I hate to look at it. But, let me see here. Oh, I have 3 missed calls. 3 missed calls and 10 missed text messages since we started this interview. That's truly epic right there, folks. That's the world we're living in. You know, I appreciate you so much, Patrick, for being on the show. One more time, what's the name of the book and where can people buy it?
It's called Fear of Missing Out, Practical Decision Making in a World of Overwhelming Choice. You can buy it on Amazon, or you can check out my website, patrickmcginnis.com, where there's a link to that and to my podcast, FOMO Sapiens.
Patrick, you're a great American. I can just tell by the way you sound that you're smelling terrific there in Manhattan or in New York.
Thanks so much.
All right, man. You take care.
Thanks, Patrick.
And now, without any further ado, 3, 2, 1, boom!
Boom. Boom.